Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountain top to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories and tales that come from within my beloved mountains, and we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. When it comes to the states that are touched by the Appalachian Mountains, Tennessee ain't no stranger to the tragedy that comes along with it. This week we're headed to Rock Island, Tennessee, which is one of them unincorporated areas that you've heard me talk about so much. That's where back in 1955 there lived a family named Bratcher who was farmers and one of the most beloved families around them parts. If folks needed help, they were the first to show up. If somebody needed food, they gave them what they had, shared it with them. They were right there every time anybody needed anything. So you can bet that when something bad happens to good folks like them, well, people around them parts going to need some answers and going to need them right now. So call your mom and them, come on over and have a seat while I tell you what happened to the Bratcher family in Rock Island, Tennessee. Now, it ain't no secret to anybody living in the mountains how pretty springtime is. So on one of them beautiful Appalachian March mornings in 1955, when the sun was just a-rising over the pond in Rock Island, Tennessee, a local farmer named Henry Bratcher and his younger cousin Billy Thomas Gibbs had set out to do some fishing. That's the kind of morning that makes you feel like the Lord Almighty himself done kissed them mountains good morning, and the birds woke up and got worked up, sounding like angels singing, and, oh well, I'm getting carried away. Might have jumped a shark with that, but I couldn't help it. If you live in these mountains where I'm from, you know what I feel. Now, as the day grew warmer, well, so did the temperament of young Mr. Gibbs. He'd just become a daddy of twin daughters, and I'll give him as much as that, as he might have been feeling a bit more stressed than usual. Of course, it could have been that old Tennessee sour mash that he was doing a good bit of talking to, and doing it a good bit louder than it really needed to be. Either way, he and Henry got into a heated debate over something that ain't even close to being worth what happened next because of it. Before anybody could say the word stop, Billy had grabbed up his squirreling rifle, shoved Henry off an old log stump they were sitting on, and the poor man took off running for his life because he thought Billy was either nutball or drunk enough to drop the hammer on him. Turns out that he was right, whatever one it was, because Billy, well, he bounced up right behind him and chased him down, and that rifle in his hand didn't even feel any heavier than a goose down pillow when he took off running after Henry. Billy, being a trained marksman from Korean War, didn't really have to run Henry completely down. Once he got a clear view, he squeezed off around, and Henry hit the ground like a big oak tree that was cut off 3 inches above the ground. He wasn't dead, but of course Billy wasn't done yet. He took the liberty of shooting Henry a few more times just to make sure that if he wasn't all the way gone yet, he was far enough along that he wasn't coming back. And he sure enough didn't come back, because he was graveyard dead once Billy's trigger finger was too pooped to pop off another round. Then Billy, once he made the area sound like Saigon in 1968, took a look around to see if anybody heard it. First thing that he could think to do was to take off back up to the Bratcher house. I reckon he was probably planning on feeling folks out to see if anybody heard or seen anything or suspected anything. It just so happened that the fishing pond was close enough to the house that when Billy's little battle of New Orleans happened, Miss Vassie Bratcher, Henry's wife, heard the war and come running out with baby Charlotte in her arms to see what exactly was going on down at the pond. Baby Charlotte was Henry and Vassie's granddaughter, who was staying with them while their son Charles, who was away at work for a spell, was out making a living for his baby girl since her mother died, as I understand it, was probably from complications of childbirth. Now, Miss Vassie saw Dog Squeeze Gibbs coming up the hill from a pond like he was charging the German lines during the Battle of the Bulge, and done what we'd all do when we weren't armed to defend ourselves, and that was, well, make a break for it. Of course, you can only move so fast with the baby in your arms, so Billy caught right up to her. What happened next was more than any human being could bear, and one of the things that broke the hearts of the hardened law officers who'd spent years seeing that kind of god-awful stuff, things people could do to each other. According to Billy Gibbs, he made Miss Vassie throw the poor child into the cistern and watched as she disappeared into the cold, dark water down there. Well, police beg to differ with that. They think that he ripped her away from Miss Vassie and threw her in himself. Then, whatever one of them happened, he shot Miss Bratcher down right there in the yard like a catfish swimming in a 5-gallon bucket, and she was gone before she even hit the ground. Now, like all wackadoodles, he got all lizard-brained up while still believing he's the smartest individual around them parts. So the next thing that he could come up with was to climb into Henry's truck and drive off like Gator McCluskey doing a shine run, and drive hell-bent for leather from McMinnville, and sell the rifle. Because he was, we all know that once you don't have it no more, they can't connect nothing to you. Yeah, folks, he was a real Einstein. Once he ditched the gun, he came back to the farm and went about his business as usual, acting like nothing was wrong. He did take a few seconds to take an axe to the family dog, I reckon just because it was alive still. Now, he left it laying in behind the barn there. All that with Miss Vassie's body still laying out in the front yard. I reckon the genius was just plain incapable of thinking ahead or something, I don't know. As long as nobody was there telling him that his butt was in a ringer and he'd better do something about it, about all the carnage, I guess, he'd left laying around the farm, in his feeble simp of a mind, I guess nothing was wrong. And I reckon if nobody had ever showed up to the Bratcher farm again, it might have worked. So the nutball was walking around the farm being a farmer because he had no sense at all. That was until little Lily Mae Bratcher, who was the youngest of Henry and Vassie's children, came home from school. As Billy tells it, because he's the only one left to tell anybody anything, he didn't mean to hurt that girl, but he had to walk by her, or she had to walk by her mother's body all splayed out on the front lawn, since the mastermind Billy hadn't had enough sense to move her out of sight. Now, when the young'un saw her mama laying there on colder than a doorknob, she let out a scream that could wake the dead. So he did the first thing that popped into his little brain, which was to take the hammer that he just happened to be holding in his hand at the time and put the quietus on the poor Lily. Now, I reckon all the time while not meaning to hurt her. Once he finished her off, that must have did it for the day's farm chores, so he jumped back in Henry's truck and went on home, got him a little supper, went on to bed, and slept off the sour mash like it was just another day at the farm. The next morning, Billy might have felt like he'd been hit by a truck and was being followed by another truck. It was even bigger, and all 18 wheels ran over him, but he bounced right out of bed and batted hell right back for the Bratcher place. Sobriety must have been like a slap in the face standing out in 5 below cold. So when it finally hit the vapid-headed slapnut that he'd better do something, he figured that something had better be hiding bodies, which he did. He hid Henry in the family's cane field. Then he dragged Miss Vassie and little Lily over to a sinkhole and was just a few yards away from the house, and he chunked them both in. Apparently, the way he had it figured, that would be the end of it. Why, folks, he could just get to stepping off to the shadows like a copperhead with a belly full of squirrel, and everything was going to be just fine. In his feeble mind, it was the perfect crime. Nobody'll ever come asking where the Bratcher family went, and in case they did, Billy had figured that out too. He left a note taped to the front door for any busybody that might just happen to stop by. While Billy was busy putting the icing on his deception cake, Sheriff Youngblood got wind that the entire Bratcher family just might be missing, and the whole town was a mite worried about it. Billy hadn't bit more than got done with than there was a full-fledged search party sent out searching and looking for him. And that was around the same time that he was seen, or Billy was seen by a deputy cruising around in Henry's truck, which wasn't all that odd. Well, not at first, anyway. They'd seen him driving Henry's truck plenty of times, and the deputy hadn't yet heard about anybody going missing. Now, the way the wheels came off was that on Friday, March 25th, 2 days after the twit wiffle Gibbs killed everybody in the house for no more reason than the fact that they just happened to be home, Charles Bratcher got off his job, drove back to town, and went to his parents' house to spend time with his baby girl, Charlotte. Now, when he got there, he found a sign on the door advising any visitors that just might show up that the whole Bratcher family was in Nashville, where baby Charlotte had been hospitalized. Now, he was concerned about his daughter, so Charles went over to McMinnville, where he aimed to find out why his daughter had been taken to the doctor's in a city that was 2 hours away. Not that he so much that he believed that the note was scribbled out in crayon, so much as he just wanted to be sure. Now, the more he asked, the less he found out, because nobody heard, seen, even smelled anything. Now, that's when he called the police and the searching started. Once they started asking around, investigators found out that the dead head on a mopstick Gibbs had loaded up, hauled off, and sold 2 mules and some pigs that belonged to Henry Bratcher, because I reckon he figured Henry wouldn't be needing them anymore and didn't figure anybody'd notice. So police issued a theft warrant against Dog Squeeze Gibbs, and he woke up from his drunken stupor bright and early on that Saturday morning with the voice of a nightingale yelling, "Get on the ground," at the top of his lungs. Now, he was pounced on, arrested, and dragged into the Warren County Jail, where at least they would hold him in custody for a legitimate charge for the time being, and they could drag him into one of the cold rooms where they could ask him some questions. Now, remember, in 1955, that was before the Miranda warnings, so sometimes things could still get a little rough. Now, whilst he was being questioned about the missing family, law enforcement officers and community volunteers all went over to the Bratcher place to do a little looking around for clues, and even maybe the family themselves. First thing they found was nothing other than the body of little Charlotte, who was floating in the barn's cistern. I can't even imagine how mad and broken-hearted they all were when they found her. There probably ain't no words ever been invented that could describe it. Next, they found the bodies of Vassie and Lily in the sinkhole. Then they found Henry's bullet-riddled body in the cane field near. Once word got out, town folks were ready to string him up from the nearest oak tree. Trying to prevent any more bloodshed, Sheriff Youngblood, well, he just quickly moved the nut ball to an undisclosed location, which was actually the Coffee County Jail and nearby Tullahoma. Now, that's where the serious questions started. At first, the genius denied any knowledge of the murders. From the way it's gone so far, he probably acted like he didn't even know the Bratcher family or who they was. All the question must have had his little brain cell ready to pop a gasket, because after almost 24 hours straight of what they called intense questioning by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, Detective Kenneth Shelton was the detective on that, the moron provided a complete written confession, which investigators said pretty much coincided with the evidence found at the farm. As you might guess, the town folks were strung tighter than a banjo string when the pipsqueak was arraigned on murder charges before the Honorable Judge Robert S. Brady. It was for that reason that the hearing was done in complete secrecy, with the moose twit being snuck into the law enforcement officials, snuck back into town. Now, probably stuffed his ass in the trunk of the police car and drove him into court, if I had a way to do with it. But after all the when twos and why fours were over with that, the Dog Squeeze was immediately transferred to a state-sponsored mental hospital to undergo psychiatric testing, where doctors later determined him to be as sane as the judge had sent him there, which meant that he was competent to stand trial. Now, being unemployed due to the misfortune bestowed upon the only human being in his family that tried to help him, and the harebrained wisp of a man, he was appointed to services of the local attorneys W.G. McDonough and George Mason Beaver, who successfully argued their client would not receive a fair trial in Warren County, and they were absolutely right on that front at least. Folks were so mad that they'd hang him right there and be done with it if they had their way. So the first trial started in May of 1955 and took place in Manchester, Tennessee, in the courtroom there, where Moonbat Gibbs smiled and waved at his wife and father, who was there, and then laughed at his attorneys while he was talking to them. And the public wondered just how stupid and soulless he actually was, because he was on trial that time for murder of a 10-year-old girl named Lily. Now, by May 26, 1955, he was being sentenced to 99 years and 1 day after being found guilty. Then, August of 1955, the slapnut went on trial for the murders of Vassy and Charlotte Ann Bratcher. Again, he was found guilty of murder, but this time only for one of the two counts. Don't ask me how, but the jury had been unable to agree on a verdict on the murder of Miss Bratcher, so a mistrial was declared on that charge, but he was guilty for the murder of little Charlotte, and once again received a 99 years and 1 day sentence. After both of them convictions, the defense and District Attorney Fred Gilliam copped a plea agreement for the maniac, pleaded guilty to murdering Henry Bratcher, and was sentenced to an additional 20 years and 1 day, for a grand total of 218 years and 3 days. Now, so far, he's dodging the process of being fried, dyed, and laid to the side in Tennessee's electric chair, having been completely spent from defending somebody that they'd as soon pinch the head off of and flush down a toilet as soon as looked at. Doing it all through two trials where the entirety of the public wanted to hang them right beside the barking Moonbat. Attorneys McDonough and Beaver asked the judge to let them go from defending the dog squeeze anymore, so they could go get a sitz bath and decontaminate from having to sit near the wackadoodle for as long as they already have. I imagine they felt like somebody put a bag over their heads and beat the hell out of them with a Louisville slugger when their request was denied, because they planned on retrying Hollowhead Gibbs for the murder of Miss Vassy, and the plea copping department was closed for business. Now, he was going to trial, and he was going to face the death penalty if he was convicted this time. Now, you might say that the third time was the charm for the twit wiffle Gibbs. A last-minute plea offer was made and would have kept him off death row. But deadhead on a mop stick, well, he figured that since they didn't convict him of Miss Vassy's murder the first time, he was going to take his chances by smiling and waving his way through another trial. It wasn't like he'd had a single good decision so far, and this one turned out to be a turd too. In January of 1956, the maniac was found guilty of Miss Bratcher's murder and sentenced to a date with Old Smoky, which is Tennessee's electric chair. Of course, his attorneys threw out an appeal and was laughed out of court, allowing him to go ahead and try to wash the stain off of him. At that point, the governor went ahead and signed a death order, making him a dead man walking. On Tuesday, May 7th, 1957, the warden of the state prison in Davidson County woke Billy Gibbs up early enough to shave his head, probably around 4 o'clock in the morning. I wonder if the genius smiled and waved while they did that. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, as they were getting ready to drag him to the chair and strap him in for his lightning ride, he handed the warden an envelope to be given to his father. Now, nobody knows to this day what was in it. After he strapped him down and asked him if he had anything to say, he shook his head no just before they flipped the switch and blasted him into the unknown. He was pronounced dead at 5:05 in the morning, so they didn't waste a minute of time. Charles Bratcher, who lost his parents, sister, and daughter in the nut jobs murder spree, passed away on March 13th of 2009 at the age of 75. He'd got married again and was the father of 2 sons, a daughter, 3 grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren. He's buried beside his second wife, and just across the pathway from his family in the Brick House Cemetery in Rock Island, Tennessee. Hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, or if you're watching on Spotify, YouTube, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend, and I will see you then.